Welcome on in, golf fans. It's your boy Gsluke here with our DFS and betting preview for this week's Sentry Tournament of Champions. Gonna make sure you're ready for all of your exposure. But first off, a look at the golf course, my key stats and modeling for the Kapalua Plantation course, and then afterwards, what most of you are here for, I look through my DFS and betting exposure and a few of my key players. Now I'm gonna be rounding my exposure behind. So by the end, you'll have all the info you need to go out there, get your research process started, and hopefully give you guys a few player targets that you can go out there and keep your eye on. So without further ado, let's go ahead and hop right on in. But first off, a look at that modeling in my key stats. We've got a very unique resort style golf course in play this week that is going to have a lot of birdie production, really low scoring over the 4 days, but plays a lot differently than most of those resort style golf courses. Main reason for that being some of the elevation changes that you have around Kapalua, but also the really tough green complexes that make both putting and around the green shots a lot harder than you'd expect for a golf course like this. Really, the resort style aspect comes into play with the wide fairways, also some of the more generous scoring opportunities that you have on a par 73 setup. That includes reachable par 5s, also even a potentially drivable par 4 or 2. So you're going to see a lot of birdies made out there. And in fact, last year out there on Sunday, they had better than a 6 under par scoring average. So birdie or better percentage, making putts, setting up birdie opportunities is going to be the name of the game this week. And when we take a look at our key stats over here on the custom model, you're going to see that reflected rather heavily. Over in the approach buckets, we're focusing on the scoring wedges. So 50 to 125, even 125 to 150 are going to be two buckets that I'm well over the field on. And then on the flip side, with the par 5s and the drivable par 4s, I'm also looking at some of the longer shots into greens as well. So that would be a lot of your shots from 200 plus yards. The real quote unquote dead range on a week like this is going to be those middle irons, which are used just a little bit less. Off the tee, it is a 7,600 yard golf course. You want to be at least a little bit long to take advantage of those par 5s, but with a golf course that long, it is always going to be an advantage. But putting is a huge part of the equation this week, whether it's recent form heading in. I mean, that's always great to have in your back pocket, but Bermuda grass numbers and historical baseline are also going to be a key part of my models. Birdie or better percentage included. We got some par 5 scoring as well with all those reachable par 5s in play, and then also shots gained at no cut events in my comp course history as well. And speaking of comp courses, I've got 5 on here for you guys to go through. We've got the Black Desert Championship, Worldwide Technologies Championship, both of those resort style golf courses. Albany Golf Club, similar from the aesthetic standpoint, also the visuals off the tee, some wide fairways but natural areas just off the beaten path. You got the Masters, that's more so from the elevation change and undulation perspective, very similar look over there at Augusta. And then St. Andrews, the old course, has a lot of those drivable par 4s, also reachable par 5s like you have in play here. So it's similar type of scoring to what you get at those resort style golf courses. So, you know, kind of a different factor, different sort of aspect that we're looking at with all these courses, but a little bit of crossover that you can find at those 5 different tracks. What you get by putting all this together is you need a well-rounded player to go out there and score, but we mostly want guys with high horsepower, players that have the ability to get to something like 20 or 30 under par, that's what we've seen go out there and win this event year in and year out. A lot of that comes down to weather. If it's going to be a little bit windier, maybe it's closer to 20 under par that ends up taking it home. But if it's going to be calm, like we saw there 3-4 years ago, you could get 30 or even better than 30 under par winning. So it is the biggest birdie fest of all the birdie fests out there. Of course, guys, all the content this year is going to be sponsored by Bet the Number. And if you guys want to use some of these key stats to go out there and make all of your models for yourself, make sure to check out Bet the Number. There's a link in the description of the video to go out there and check out their site. Code Gsluke will give you a discount off any membership. And the best part about it is you can take bits and pieces of what we just talked about and really emphasize what you want to look for in players this week. If you really want to look at some of the bombers off the tee, then you can take your driving distance and really bump that up over there on the Bet the Number model. If you want to really focus on the scoring wedges, you can increase that emphasis over there in your modeling. Bermuda grass putting, birdie or better percentage, you are the architect, you are the engineer of your model on your end, which is what I love about the Bet the Number site. So if you guys haven't already checked it out, make sure to go ahead and do so yourself. A lot of my key stats and what I'm looking for in players this week are what the Bet the Number guys are looking at. They work with tour players. They have people on staff that are working strategy with multiple PGA Tour players currently, including a winner over there during the fall swing. So you want to make sure that you're following what they're doing. They are in line. They are as in the weeds as humanly possible when it comes to this course stuff. And of course, code Gsluke will give you a discount off any of those memberships, and you can make all your models for yourself. And now for the DFS and betting section, going through some of the pieces of exposure that I'll be getting to this week to give you guys a little taste for what I'm getting to. So we'll start up top with our first core play, who's going to be Xander Schauffele at $11,000. You got no Scotty here, so he is your number one option in this field. And though he is $11,000, which is pretty expensive, because we only have a 60-player field and the pricing is so soft down there in the 6 and 7K range, it is no problem at all to fit in an 11K player. In fact, I would argue that somebody like Xander should probably be at least 12 grand at this sort of golf course. And really what we're looking for in our spend ups is somebody that can finish top 3 or win this thing. We need win equity. If they're not going to win, they need to be finishing second or third, really at the very worst. And that's exactly what you're getting with the Xander Schauffele. He's the betting favorite for a reason. And if you take a look at his event history, he's had a pretty decent go around this track as well. Outside of the withdrawal 2 years ago, which came down to health concern. If you weren't familiar, he was injured the week before this event, so that's why he had to withdraw. But a T10 last year, maybe not his best stuff, but not a poor performance by any means. The 12th place finish, also not his best stuff, but a T5 in 2021 and also a second place finish back there in 2020 are exactly what we're looking for in a Xander Schauffele. And though we don't have a ton of recent form to go off of, in fact, for these top-end players, hardly any of them really have any recent form to go off of. When we last saw Xander Schauffele, he was very much so on brand, gaining across all 4 stat categories, went out there, had a hell of a run out there in the Fedex Cup playoffs. He's the kind of player that I think is ascended to another level, and in this kind of field, without Scotty Scheffler, he is the clear alpha dog out here for the Sentry Tournament of Champions. So I'm using him out there in lineups. I didn't like the outright number enough to go out there and take it for an outright bet, but I do love him out there in DFS. He'll get some ownership. I'm expecting around 25, maybe to around 35% ownership on Xander Schauffele, but considering that he is clearly the best player in this sort of field, if there's anyone worth taking at that sort of ownership number, it's a player of Xander Schauffele's caliber. So I'll definitely be using him out there in a few lineups. He's a decent Bermuda grass putter. You can see in terms of the long-term course fit, I've got him at number 7 out there in my modeling. Recent form, only 16 in the field, so there are definitely players that have better recent form. But what it's worth noting, especially when we looking at the recent form tab, is that he hardly played in the fall swing. You have a lot of these mid to lower tier players that were playing pretty much every fall series event against much weaker competition than what you have with these top tier players. So over here on the recent form tab, you'll see like a Morikawa's 19th, for example. An Aubert is 38th in terms of his recent form. That tab is going to be extremely misleading this week. You don't have players having the recent form coming from the same events, so to compare them apples to apples is nearly impossible from that perspective. So what I've done with my modeling this week is I've more so focused on some of that longer term form as opposed to some of the recent form that is going to give you some mixed signals because of that fall swing. So at 11 grand, I wouldn't worry about that recent form rank all that much. This longer term fit where he's number 7 in the field is much more up his alley. And if you're looking at just raw fantasy point projection over there in my modeling, he's the clear number 1 player in the field. So that's why I'm getting well over the field on Xander Schauffele. In terms of the course fit as well, I mean, he's a well-rounded player. And as I mentioned during that course fit section, we're looking for guys that can kind of do everything, that can score, that can get it done on the par 5s, fill it up with the putter, that are good in the wedge in those par 5 ranges. When it comes to the approaches, he checks literally every single box. That's the one thing about Xander Schauffele. He has no weaknesses in his game, which is perfect for a golf course like Kapalua. Next up, we got our first outright bet, another core play that I'm getting to, and that's going to be Justin Thomas at $9,700. What I like about JT is some of the course history that we've seen around here, and also the form, which has been 9-day difference over the last 3 or 4 months. He started to look like the JT of old, has gone into contention more than a handful of times, and the stats are starting to indicate that as well. It's not just the eye test that looks a lot better out there for JT. We've started to see it come along with some of the stats as well. So let's go through some of this. So he's first off, he's plus 1,000 to win, so I took him at 10 to 1. Also took the top 5 at plus 250. So I went with both of those markets there, divvied up my units between those 2 bets. And what I like here, if we go to the event history, is he's won here before, won here back in 2020, 3rd place the year after that, then had a 5th place there in 2022. So I know he didn't play here last year, had a poor start back there in 2023 with that 20 only 5th place finish, but he had a 3-year stretch where he had no worse than a top 5 finish, and that of course included the win back there in 2020. You take a look at the last 24 measured rounds, and he's gaining in every category but the putter. But the one thing we know about Justin Thomas is that his best putting surface is by far Bermuda grass. He of course grew up in the South. He now lives down here in Jupiter in Florida, butts on Bermuda grass for 90% of the year on this kind of surface. If there's one type of grass where you can play Justin Thomas and have him play a lot better, it's usually on his home surface. So though he's still a loser for his career over there on Bermuda, you can see he's about a third of a stroke better per round over an entire event. That is over a stroke difference just by putting him on Bermuda grass. You add on top of that the fact that the form has been really solid. In fact, if you take a look at the last 12 measured rounds, which includes that 2nd place finish at the Zozo Championship, you can see he's gaining even more when it comes to his shots gained tee to green. The putter still a little bit into the negative, losing about 0.4 strokes per round, but hopefully that Bermuda grass surface can get him back to making some putts. And I think the real reason to have some optimism here is that he's done it before. You take a look at his starts when he was finishing top 5 3 to 5 years ago, and he was out there into the green on these green complexes. So in terms of his modeling, he's number 5 from the long-term ranking, which with the form the last 3-4 months makes a lot of sense. Number 3 in recent form ranking, and worth noting that he doesn't have all of his starts during that fall swing, so some of those came from much stronger fields than what you have for some of those mid to lower tier players. And overall ranking is my number 4 ranked play in the field. So solid projection, price at $9,700 I think is fair in this kind of field. And I liked him enough to not only use him as a DFS core play this week, but also took him as an outright and for that top 5 at plus 250. Of course, guys, for all of these projections, everything you see on these spreadsheets for yourself, make sure to check out my Patreon page. There's a link to my Patreon in the description of this video. On there is where you can get all my projections, all of my modeling, every single data point that you see throughout these spreadsheets, yours completely uncensored. That includes my ownership out there for GPPs, my entire GPP player pool, as well as recent form, event history, shots gained metrics, also all of those custom weight models that were censored over there before, completely at your disposal as they update throughout the week. So not only are you going to have every single player covered, not just the 6 that we cover here on these previews, you're going to have every player fully detailed for you for every single event, and of course it updating throughout the week. So if we get some news, maybe some weather that changes up our modeling, you're going to have all of that accounted for there before Wednesday lock. So make sure to join the Patreon page if you guys haven't already. On there is where you can get all the content that I'm producing for any given week. Again, link in the description to go out there and join. DFS tier is how you get access to all of these spreadsheets, and the best part about it is you don't get price gouged to go out there and join my site. It is only $15 a month. You can get access to everything that you guys see here, which is by far one of the best values in the entire industry, if not the best value. I'm partial. I always say a little bit biased. I think it's the best value, but I think you guys can decide for yourselves out there. Let's move on. Let's go to our last core play now before we talk about our values towards the bottom end of the board. And our next core play is going to be Wyndham Clark at $8,800. And what I like about Wyndham this week is he's going to be overlooked. He's not going to get a bunch of attention out there in GPPs. So if you're looking to get a little bit different to the field, I think you're going to accomplish that out there with Wyndham Clark. But I love the course fit. He's a player with infinite birdie or better upside. In fact, he was a top 5 player in birdie or better percentage for the year. He's got the length to take on all of these par 5s and 2. He's got the length to take on 2 of the drivable par 4s off the tee as well, and he's a really good putter long term. Now recently he started to fall off a little bit. In fact, over his last 24 rounds, he's been in one of the sketchier stretches of form that he's had for quite some time. You can see here losing on approach. That's not what we want to see from one of these top level players, but he is still into the positive in the other 3 categories. So it's not like he's playing horrendous golf. It's just a little bit off compared to what we're used to from him. Over the last 12 rounds though, he is negative in 3 of the 4 stat categories. So has had a little bit of a rough stretch lately, but for him, those came in some of the strongest fields in all of golf. Playoff events. He has not played much here during the fall swing. So for us to condemn him on that quote unquote form that came from 3-4 months ago and happened in much stronger fields than what we have of these mid to lower tier players is, I think, an absolute mistake. So at plus 3,000, I took a shot on him. He's a big game hunter. We've seen him go out out there and win majors before. We've also seen him go out there and win events like the Wells Fargo Championship. Big hitters ballparks going against the world's best players in a signature event. This is that same kind of arena. You're going against the world's best players, big ballpark with a 7,600-yard golf course. The form, maybe not what we're hoping for, but he hasn't even played much recently. Maybe he's figured something out. Maybe he's made some swing changes that are going to really make some positive changes out there in his game. It's hard to say that, and I think if anything, with a high upside player like we have here with Wyndham Clark, that can only be a positive for his chances going forward. So, you take a look at the event history, he doesn't have much to speak of. He has the T29 that he finished here last year. The form we already know is not the best. Recent form also not a huge big positive. In fact, hasn't even played over the last 8 tour events, but those unknowns could make him very much so overlooked. He's the kind of player where we would not be surprised whatsoever if he ended up holding up the hardware on a Sunday. And in GPPs, in those sort of contests where you're looking for that pure upside, I think he brings a lot of intrigue on a week like this. And now moving on to the value plays where we can try and save a little bit of salary, open up some flexibility towards the top end of the board, and try and find some diamonds in the rough to pop off this week. And we're going to start it off with Max Grazerman, who's $8,000 towards the very tippy top, what I consider a quote-unquote value play, maybe even stretching that definition a little bit. But when he's my number 2 model rank play of the week, you can see why I wanted to squeeze him into this kind of preview. In terms of your quote-unquote long-term fit, even crazier, he is the number 1 player that I have out there in my rankings, partially because he is such a good Bermuda grass putter. But when you take a look at the last 24 rounds, we've got ourselves an absolute baller with the shots gained profile. Sure, not the best approach player, he's about average in that category, but gains off the tee both with his accuracy and his distance, and gains over 1.65 shots gained putting per round, which is the kind of number that we haven't seen really ever out there on the PGA Tour. And this isn't even like a 12 round sample size, this is over the last 24 rounds, so that is 6 full events where he's gaining nearly 2 strokes putting per round. You zoom in over the last 12 measured rounds, you may say, oh, it's definitely going to drop off, right? No, he's gaining over 2.1 shots gained putting per round, which is certainly seems a little bit unsustainable, but lately he's gotten a lot better with the approach play. So not only has he been making a bunch of putts over his last 12 rounds, he's also now gaining over half a stroke approach per round. These events have been in fall series events where he has been going against much weaker competition events, but at the same time, he's 8 grand. He's a really good fit off the tee, makes a bunch of birdies, good par 5 score. Also, one of the best Bermuda grass putters that we have in the field, makes him really hard to not want to go out there and jam in. Now, I didn't take him for an outright. I'm not sure I see him beating an elite level field like this quite yet, but for the top 10 at plus 300, that was a number that I was more than willing to get to myself. And in DFS at just 8 grand, I think he's a little bit cheaper than he probably should be. I put him up there in the range of like a Russell Henley at this kind of event, considering that he is such a good course fit for the Kapalua Plantation course. So it'll be his first go around here. He, of course, has never played at the Tournament of Champions before, but I think it could be a good course fit out there for Max Grazerman, and hence why I'm playing him there at $8,000. And to give you guys an idea of a player that I think profiles very similar to Grazerman would be a Harris English, who's won around the Tournament of Champions before. Harris English, a really good Bermuda grass putter, hits the ball relatively long way off the tee, but isn't always the best approach player. He's a little bit inconsistent when it comes to that shots gained approach, kind of like you have with Grazerman. You saw over the last 24 rounds, he was actually losing in that category. And if the Bermuda grass stats hold up, if that form over the last 24 rounds tells us anything, he might be dealing with a young budding superstar here with Max Grazerman. Next up, we got ourselves Matt Fitzpatrick here at $7,200, somebody that I affectionately call Brace Face from time to time. He's definitely gone on my nerves before, but at $7,200, this guy is going to come around at some point. For as much crap as I'll give Matt Fitzpatrick, he's one of those players that I like to make fun of, if I'm being completely honest. He's a really good player. I mean, he's won a major before. He was routinely finishing in the top 30 East like pretty much every year in the PGA Tour until this last year, where he tended to fall off a little bit. He's $7,200, which I think is just too much of an over an adjustment, especially when you consider that guys like Jake Knapp are priced around him. You've got guys like even a Nick Dunlop that are there at $7,200. Matt Fitzpatrick is a much better player than pretty much everyone else around him, and sure, he may have fallen off just a little bit. That happens to golfers sometimes. You saw it happen with Billy Horschel, and now he's back on top of the world. You saw it happen with Jordan Spieth for 2-3 years, and then he came back, was able to come back and win. I'll bet on long-term talent over recent form any day, especially when we're starting a brand new season like this and we've had 2 or 3 months to go out there and hit that reset button. So I took the top 10 there at plus 375, but at $7,200, I also think he's going to be one of the lower owned plays that we have in this range. Kind of like a Wyndham Clark, people are putting way too much stock out there into the fall swing, and for a player like Matt Fitzpatrick, who, his events where he played was over there on the DP World Tour, people hardly even know that he existed over the last 2-3 months. And what I'll tell you about Matt Fitzpatrick is that he's a much better player than most people would give him credit for, and that's coming from a guy that, again, calls him brace face more than Matt Fitzpatrick. So there with the recent form rank of number 10, that is a lot better than I think most people would expect. You can see on Bermuda grass, he's one of the best putters that we have in the field, gaining 2/3 of a stroke putting per round. And the event history is also probably a little bit better than you would have imagined. If we go down here to Matt Fitzpatrick at 7,200, you can see he finished T14 last year, which in the larger field was an okay finish here at the Sentry Tournament of Champions. If it was only the 30-player field, we'd probably feel differently about it, but it was a larger field that we had last year, and then the year before that, when it was a little bit smaller, is when he had that T7 finish. So I like the 2 starts that we've had for Matt Fitzpatrick here. The T14 would be pretty close to optimal at $7,200. The T7 finish would for sure pay off this kind of price tag. So I like the course fit. He's got to figure it out off the tee, but luckily has some really wide fairways this week that should give him a little bit of leniency, and maybe that's why he's played so well at this course. Then the last player we're going to go through here is going to be Nicholas Echeverria at $6,500, and I took him for a top 10 at plus 575. And what I really like about Echeverria here is that he's my number 3 model rank play, despite being number 48 in the pricing. So if you're somebody that likes value, well, you're definitely getting it with Echeverria. But his first ever tour win was also at a resort style golf course. It was at an alternate field event, so completely different type of field strength to what we're going to have for this week. But he's played really well at courses where it's all about birdie or better production. Maybe it's because he's such a good putter. You can see over here on Bermuda grass, he's gaining over 0.4 strokes per round with his shots gained putting on Bermuda, but he's also a really good par 5 scorer and one of the highest birdie or better percentage players that we have in the entire field. And in an elite field like this, he's one of the best birdie or better percentage players that we have in all of the PGA Tour. So if we take a look at the last 24 measured rounds, you'll see part of the reason that I like him so much this week. He's gaining in 3 of the 4 stat categories, most significantly though on approach, which is important for setting up all these birdie looks this week, and then the putting we know is super important at a birdie fest like this. So the 2 most important categories is where he's really been making his hay, and if we zoom in on the last 12 measured rounds, which have been coming from the fall swing, so we've got to take this with a grain of salt, it's also still gaining in those 3 categories, but gaining nearly 2 strokes putting per round. So kind of like Grazerman, you're getting a player that is in excellent form heading in on a surface that has been very favorable for his putting stats going past, and he's only $6,500. That's going to open up a ton of salary towards the top end of the board, and players like Echeverria are why I'm not worried about an $11,000 Xander Schauffele. So just to go ahead and tie this all together, it's not even just a guy like an Echeverria down low. You've got legit players down here like McCarty. He won one of his first ever tour starts out here. I mean, Adam Hadwin doesn't suck. Like, he's $6,200. You could easily play Hadwin in lineups, and Jaeger is $6,600, and I think he's a really good course fit out here for this course. Obviously I can't talk about my entire player pool here in these videos, but you're going to have enough guys towards the bottom to play to open up that salary with a Xander Schauffele. So of course, guys, to get access to all of these sheets yourself, to see my entire player pool, all my projections out there for this week, make sure to join the Patreon page, link in the description of the video to go out there and join there. But that's all I've got out here for this week's Sentry Tournament of Champions. Thank you guys for stopping by and watching the preview for this week. Before you hop on out of here, go ahead and smash that like button for me, and also comment down below who you've got winning this golf tournament for a chance to earn a free month on my Patreon page. And we're gonna have no restrictions on that. You can guess whoever you guys want to go out there and win, and if they do, you will win a free month access to the page. So I'm assuming that somebody's gonna win this week, right? If there's no restrictions on it whatsoever. The only added caveat is that once a player's taken once, they cannot be taken again. So if you're one of the first people to watch, first off, I appreciate you for being one of my biggest supporters, but you're also gonna get a huge leg up on this giveaway. So for a chance to earn that Patreon page page. Go ahead, give me your winner down there in the comments, and best of luck with first off the giveaway, but also all of your exposure this week. Whether it's over there in DFS, hopefully you guys can take down a GPP or two. We've got some real contests back on Draftkings, which is going to be nice. Or over there on the betting side of things, may you run good from that aspect as well. We're going to have our Wednesday live stream Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern time, so make sure to stop on by for all of that, as well as all the showdown content this week, which is going to be on the Ship It Nation YouTube channel. So if you guys are not subscribed over there, make sure you are so you can catch all the showdown content. Showdown content will be on the Ship It Nation channel for this year. My prop stuff, all of that kind of aspect, prize picks, underdog, is going to be on my YouTube channel directly afterwards out there for each round. So a little bit of a different content schedule. I'll get you guys caught up on it as we go through the content throughout the rest of the year, but should be a fun one. Make sure you subscribe so don't miss any of that to come, guys, and best of luck out there this week.